Welcome back, everybody. It's out for a nice ride today, and I thought it'd be fun to talk about my motorcycle history. Certainly didn't start with something like this, and I hope you're not starting with a bike like this because, well, I think it's important to have a strong base as a motorcyclist before you move to a high-performance machine. So let's go for a little bit of a ride here through San Diego and up here at Mount Soledad. It's a beautiful area. If you've never been to San Diego or if you ever visit, come up to Mount Soledad. The views are absolutely stunning. We'll kind of go around the top of the mountain here before getting into today's discussion. And of course, you have these crazy cyclists that ride all the way up the mountain. I've done it once, and that was enough. There's a wonderful memorial up here. Lots and lots of tourists, a great view of San Diego. The Thunderboat races are going on at the bay today, which is going to be crazy. I'm going to be going there later. I mean, you have boats doing 180 miles an hour across the bay. It's pretty incredible. If you get lucky enough on a summer night, it's clear enough up here that you can just see so much of the city. So it's definitely worth a visit if you're here in San Diego. The views are just breathtaking. I think they're one of the best in the city to at least take in what the city is in San Diego. So why don't we have a chat today about my motorcycle history? I started riding about 5 years ago now. Actually be going on 6 years in January. And I got started because I got a ride on the back of my buddy's CBR 1000. I had always been interested in riding a motorcycle, even when I was really young. But I didn't have the chance to grow up with dirt bikes or that sort of thing like some people here in San Diego. There's a lot of off-roading that goes on here. And so I always was interested. My dad always had motorcycles growing up. And I remember when I was probably maybe 8 years old, my dad helped a buddy fix up an old Yamaha, and I fell in love with the thing. It was awesome. I always liked cars and mechanical things, but there's always been something about bikes that it stirs your soul, right? I think that's why a lot of us ride. And it wouldn't be until much later that I was able to buy my own bike. And after I got a ride on my buddy's CBR 1000, I kid you not, that night I went on Craigslist and started looking for bikes, and I bought a bike within a couple days. And I bought a Ninja 250. And I've heard it time and time again. Don't buy a 250. It's a waste. You're going to sell it in 6 months. And guess what? I sold it in 6 months. But that does not mean it was a bad purchase by any means. I think starting on something like a 250 is incredibly important. I don't care if you sell it in 6 months because you're not going to lose any money. I sold my Ninja 250 for the exact same amount I paid for it. And if I had been smart and not bought an exhaust for it, I would have basically had a nearly free rental. I had to do zero maintenance to that bike in those 6 months, which is great because that bike taught me a lot. I had a lot of close calls, and I did take the Motorcycle Safety Foundation class, the MSF. In California, at least, that lets you skip out on the DMV test, which is basically just a low-speed riding maneuver test in the DMV parking lot. Boy, I wish I had my supermoto today. These roads are pretty bad up here. So I started with that 250, and I sold it within 6 months because I got bored of it. In hindsight, I wish I had kept that bike a little longer. I had a lot more to learn on it. But, it's like I said before, if a bike doesn't stir your soul, move on. And it's okay. I mean, you can always get another one, and hopefully you learn your lessons. So after riding that 250 for, about 6 months, I sold it. I didn't sell it right away, though, because I got lucky and found a CBR 600 F4i on Craigslist. You're going to start noticing a theme here with Craigslist. I found it on Craigslist, and it was thrashed, but it was properly cheap. I picked up this CBR for, I want to say it was about $1,200 or $1,500. It had been low-sided, so the fairings were trashed. And I'll insert a photo up here so you can see all these bikes, and particularly this Honda. And it was trashed. And I got it because I knew that the mechanicals were fine, but, you know, cosmetically it needed quite a bit of help. So I actually ended up doing the eBay fairings from China that were painted, and I did that because it was cheap and I wanted to just not spend that much money on this bike. The whole goal was to upgrade and, you know, not spend money. And I was able to successfully do that. By the time I sold my Ninja and cleaned up the CBR, I had broken even, which is pretty incredible. It was a really nice upgrade. And I'll put a picture in right here, and you'll see that when I was done with a Honda, it looked brand new. That bike was incredible. And I rode that bike for about a year and a half, until I found myself not being responsible with it, in which case I actually sold it. I just knew it was not the bike for me at the time, and I sold it because I didn't want to get hurt and I didn't need the tickets. And when I sold it, I actually got a Supermoto. At the time, I was really into watching Jake the Garden Snake, for what it's worth, and that, you know, his videos legitimately sold me on buying a Supermoto because of how much fun he was having. And I noticed that about other Supermoto riders. They were literally having a blast. And it was because the bike was so much less to handle. And I wanted that. I wanted to have fun with a bike. I didn't want to have to think about anything. And at the time, I needed a cheaper way to get back and forth to college. I had been laid off, and I was commuting on my motorcycle at that point to get to school. And it saved me a lot of money going back and forth. And I had that Supermoto for about 2 years. I put, I think, 10 or 15,000 miles on it. And it was great. I did an epic ride with it. I love that bike. And I did a couple SoCal Supermoto schools, which if you haven't checked them out and you're in Southern California, you are missing out. It's like the best value in motorcycling ever. And you learn so much doing the school. And that's why track days are so great too, right? Because you really end up learning more in a track day than you will ever riding on the street. I would go as far to say one track day is probably worth a year's worth of experience on the road. No joke. That goes for car track days too. I mean, I'm an instructor with a couple local clubs for autocrosses, and I've done some, you know, high performance driving education, and it's just, you just can't put a price really on the amount of information and knowledge you'll gain being in a closed environment, doing, you know, what you really want to do anyways. So I had the Supermoto for a while, and after commuting on it and doing a lot of freeway trips, it got old. Supermotos, in my opinion, if you live in an area like San Diego, can't be your only bike. It's just too darn difficult with all the freeways you have to traverse. You know, I will say that there is such a thing as too slow of a bike if you're going to be riding on the freeway a lot, because you need to have the ability to get out of the way of certain situations. But that does not mean I'm advocating a first-time rider goes and buys a 600cc bike. If you're a first-time rider and you have zero experience with a high-performance vehicle, I'm talking dirt bikes or cars or anything, it is a recipe for disaster. A motorcycle is so much more power than, you know, most people are really capable of comprehending at that point. So I think it's important to start smaller. The new 500cc class of bikes like the CBRs and, you know, geez, what else? Who's making the 500cc bikes now? I think Suzuki's got one, but those are really where it's at, I think, as a new rider, because they have more power than a 250, and you can certainly, you know, keep them longer. So it's definitely not a bad way to go if you're just starting. And after that, you know, after having a couple close calls on the freeway, just because I was, you know, trying to get around a vehicle or merge on the highway, I decided, you know, it was time to sell it. And at the time, the Yamaha, this is back in 2014, the Yamaha FC09 had just come out, and I saw the glowing reviews of this bike, and I just, I fell in love with it, the sound and everything. And I had actually started looking at Triumph Street Triples too at the exact same time, because it's a competitor, right? And I was looking at, older Street Triples with round headlights. I'm still a fan of those. I think it's a great classic look. And I was looking at those, and I actually test rode a fairly beat up Street Triple. Street Triple R is a 08, and I was thinking, well, I could turn this into another fun project like my CBR was. So I thought, well, maybe I'll ride it, and I'll test ride it, see if I like it. And I test rode it, and I was actually disappointed in the power of that bike. I think that bike was a little weak on the engine, so I'm gonna not say that that was really representative of how that earlier model Street Triple is and should be. But nonetheless, I decided to ride it and try and haggle with the guy, because it was really beat up, and I think he wanted a little too much money for it at the time. And ultimately, I didn't end up buying it. And I rode an FC09 about a week later at a dealer here, and I fell in love. The torque delivery, I mean, everything about that bike is just, it's all about the engine, right? So I had that for 2 years, and that's the bike I sold ultimately to get to this Triumph. But the important thing to realize, oh, this is a dead end down here. I never knew. Let's see. The one thing I don't like about this bike, as an aside, is it is incredibly, oh, there's a stall. It feels incredibly lazy doing a U-turn like that. I have never felt so uncomfortable on a bike doing a U-turn. All my other bikes, I have had zero issues with doing low speed maneuvers, but there's something about this bike I have not figured out for the low speed stuff. And I think it's partly related to how narrow these bars are compared to the last two bikes I had. It might be a me problem, and I just need to lean the bike over more. But it is what it is, and that's a cool house. So anyways, back to the bikes. So the FC09 was the last bike I had. I actually sold that to a really good friend of mine, so I can still ride it from time to time if I want. But my kind of conclusion, and my last thing I'll leave you with on this video, is that the journey is very important when you motorcycle. And what do I mean by that when you motorcycle? Your first bike isn't going to be your last. Enjoy the bikes you have, the small ones, the big ones, and everything in between, even the crappy ones, because they're all a part of your experience in learning how to motorcycle. They all teach you something. So enjoy that, and enjoy motorcycling if you're new to the sport. And if you're old to the sport and maybe you're feeling a little bit, ooh, that was rough. You're feeling a little bit disconnected from it, that's okay. But just remember why you did it. I'm just out on a wonderful morning here, just riding around, kind of exploring all these awesome mansions, because it's fun. And it's always not about ripping around on a track as fast as you can, because we don't always have that next to us. So we'll see you next time.